Everything hung in the balance. Nothing would ever be the same again. Bold deeds, fatal errors, and brilliant decisions changed the course of history, all on a single day.
Bürger, holt euch das Pulver, dann marschieren wir gemeinsam zur Bastille!
To the Bastille, to the feared fortress of the king, the gloomy dungeon of the monarchy. Storm, the hated symbol of despotism. Should the prison governor yield to the mob, or should he hold the fortress at any price?
Ihre Befehle?
The garrison was reinforced by Swiss guards, led by an officer loyal to the king. On the 14th of July, war was declared on the people of Paris. 98 people died in the hail of bullets, but the besiegers did not give up.
Das ist ja eine Revolte!
Governor Delaunay threatened to blow the Bastille up, killing thousands. On the 14th of July, everything hung in the balance. It was the day when heroes of the people made history. Marie Charpentier was there. She tells the story based on eyewitness accounts.
If I had not been present at the events in Paris on the 14th of July, I would never have believed it. In the list of the victors of the Bastille, I was the only woman along with 954 men. The washerwoman, Marie Charpentier. Paris had been in turmoil for days. There was great unrest. Nor was that night any calmer. Thousands had taken to the streets. All of Paris backed the National Assembly's demand that the people should have a share of power. We had formed a citizens' militia. For the king was threatening to march against us. He wanted to turn us back into slaves. 13,000 men were ready to defend Paris with their lives, but we didn't have enough guns. Everyone was urged to make their guns available to the citizens' militia, but not everyone responded. Our self-appointed city government, the Permanent Committee, instructed us to seize weapons if we had to.
Im Namen des Volkskomitees, Waffen für die
Bürger!
When the people broke into the gun shops, wrote an observer, they had crossed the Rubicon. Their slogan now had to be victory or the gallows.
Dans les jours qui précèdent le 14 juillet 1789, on peut dire que les esprits sont très agités. Le palais royal, notamment, entre autres, qui est le cœur de l'agitation politique, est en effervescence. Les gens se rassemblent, notamment dans les cafés où on lit les gazettes, on commente les nouvelles. Et il est évident que dans ce milieu un petit peu interlope, dans cet espace clos où n'entre pas la police, évidemment, l'agitation politique est à son comble. Et là-dessus, la nouvelle du renvoi de Necker va être comme une sorte de bombe.
The Palais Royal, where the revolution began on the 12th of July, 1789. When word spread of the dismissal of Finance Minister Necker, there was a spontaneous march of protest. In the forefront, the demonstrators carried a wax bust of the minister. They demanded his immediate reinstatement. To avert imminent national bankruptcy, Necker had proposed making the nobility pay tax. That made him an adversary of the court in Versailles and a favorite of the people of Paris. The journalist Camille Desmoulins made a rousing speech from one of the coffeehouse tables. Citizens, Necker has been driven out. After this trick, they will dare anything. This dismissal sounds the death knell for patriots. They are planning another St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Citizens, to arms. Only a few steps away from the Palais Royal were the Tuileries, the royal gardens, a popular place for a stroll. This is where the procession marched on Sunday the 12th of July to demand Necker's return to office. A regiment of the king's troops dispersed it by force. An eyewitness reported, Prince Lambesc rode at their head. He struck down an unarmed man with his saber and rode over women and children. Fury flared up. Now there was only one cry in Paris. To arms, citizens. While the people of Paris filled the streets at night, the National Assembly deputies were meeting on a tennis court at Versailles. They demanded that from now on, law, rather than a monarch, by the grace of God, should be the highest power in the state. An affront to Louis XVI. Louis threatened to disband the National Assembly and arrest its members. But the deputies were no longer listening to the king. They vowed to remain in session and not to separate until the constitution of the kingdom is established upon firm foundations.
C'est dans cette salle qu'a été prêté le serment du jeu de paume, d'où on a daté la naissance de la liberté de la nation française. Quels sont les buts des députés en prêtant ce serment? Eh bien, ils sont écrits dans le serment. Ce qu'ils veulent, c'est en finir avec la monarchie absolue, mais pour établir une monarchie constitutionnelle, une monarchie tempérée.
They also wanted to abolish the privileges of the first two estates, the clergy and nobility. The third estate, the commoners, were the only ones who paid tax. In the tennis court oath, the deputies demanded the right to be the only legal representatives of the nation. They later set down their principles in the Declaration. Men are born free and remain free and equal in rights. Law is the expression of the general will. Every citizen has a right to participate in its foundation. Every deputy but one put his name to the tennis court oath. With their signatures, they demanded an end to the old order and the liberation of society from the chains of feudalism.
Révolution de la prospérité ou révolution de la misère? Les deux. La révolution s'inscrit à l'issue de ce glorieux XVIIIe siècle dont on a parlé, de la hausse séculaire des prix et de la rente. Dans cette France où la bourgeoisie s'affirme, bien, un repli s'est esquissé depuis les années 70 de stagnation des prix. Mais ce n'est pas cela qui déclenche la crise. c'est les conditions météorologiques de 1788, la grêle, la tempête, la mauvaise récolte, qui en 89 vont provoquer cette crise d'ancien style, c'est-à-dire où les prix des grains du blé bondissent et affolent le peuple des campagnes comme le peuple des villes.
The fields were ruined. After the poor harvest, the farmers had hardly any seed to sow for 1789. The people feared famine. Many peasant families poured into Paris. They begged their richer relatives for bread. It was a pitiful sight. The people's cry for bread was linked to their anger over the king's arbitrary taxation system. Louis XVI had built a high wall around Paris. The city could only be entered at excise offices, where officials levied duty on all goods, a splendid source of revenue for the king. During the night of the 13th of July, enraged farmers and merchants set fire to the excise offices. The king was unlikely to let this go unpunished.
In the night, all the patriots were out and about. Everyone was drawn into the maelstrom. People gathered everywhere. Fires were burning on all the streets, in all the corners. It was an incredible muddle. We threw tables, chairs, barrels, cobblestones, carts, everything we could find into the streets to make barricades. If the king's troops came, they should not be able to simply slaughter us.
The unrest in Paris was a threat to the unlimited rule of Louis XVI. At court, people were saying the king's sword had slipped from his hand.
Le roi n'est pas que le personnage apathique que l'on a bien voulu présenter le plus souvent. Il a décidé de reprendre la situation en main. Les 22 et 26 juin, il signe des ordonnances de marche très importantes qui doivent donner l'ordre donc à plusieurs régiments de converger vers la capitale. À la fin donc de cette marche-là, 30 000 hommes doivent entourer la capitale. Lui et son chef d'état-major, le maréchal de Broglie, sont persuadés de la fidélité de ces troupes sur lesquelles ils peuvent compter.
On the 14th of July, the Hôtel de Ville, the town hall, became the political center of the citizens' revolt. The previous day, they had deposed the mayor and set up the new provisional city government, the Permanent Committee. Owing its legitimacy to the people rather than the king, the Permanent Committee set up the citizens' militia and distributed guns and powder.
During the night, the news spread like wildfire that gunpowder was stored in the Hôtel de Ville. Everyone rushed there. We all wanted some, for without powder, our guns were useless.
Das reicht euch. Ja. Hört auf zu drängeln.
The Permanent Committee had seized a whole shipload of barrels from a merchant. But then it turned out that there was far too little gunpowder for us all.
Ruhe! Das Pulver ist alle, der Rest ist in der Bastille. Die Armee hat es für euch in Sicherheit gebracht. Sie fürchtet die Bürgerwehr.
Bürger! Auf diesen Verrat gibt es nur eine Antwort. Auf zur Bastille! Los, wir gehen!
To the Bastille became the fiery slogan of the day. Since the 17th century, the kings of France had used the medieval city fortress as a prison. It had a fearsome reputation. Anyone who criticizes the king or the highest levels of government may languish in it their whole lives. They live on bread and water, and many rot alive. On the 14th of July, the notorious prison became the focal point of the revolution.
Im Laufe des 17. Jahrhunderts waren in der Bastille vor allen Dingen adlige Rebellen untergebracht worden, auch Protestanten. Im Laufe des 18. Jahrhunderts erschien Frankreich vielmehr gefährdet durch Aufklärer und ihre Produkte, nämlich die Bücher. Und darum ist es kein Wunder, dass im Laufe des 18. Jahrhunderts immer mehr Schriftsteller und ihre Bücher in die Bastille eingeliefert werden. Und diese Schriftsteller mussten sich ihren Platz auf dem Markt erkämpfen. Und das ist der Grund dafür, warum sie zum Teil groteske Geschichten erfunden haben über ihren Aufenthalt in der Bastille, ihre Quälereien, ihre Hoffnungslosigkeit. Und diese Geschichten wurden in Frankreich und in Europa mit großem Erfolg verkauft. Und dieses ist der Grund dafür, warum die Bastille in der Tat zu einem Symbol für den Despotismus in Frankreich, aber auch in ganz Europa wird.
While we were waiting for delegates of the permanent committee in front of the Hôtel de Ville, I heard rumors. A huge number of the king's regiments were said to be waiting to slaughter us. And at the Bastille, the cannons were ready to fire. The prison governor was threatening to reduce the neighboring district to rubble.
Wir werden zu eurem Schutz mitkommen.
Ja, also gehen wir.
The permanent committee had decided to send a delegation to the Bastille to try to negotiate with the governor.
The Bastille was only 2 kilometers from the Hôtel de Ville. The army had taken 350 barrels of gunpowder there to secure them from the citizens' militia. On the battlements, over a dozen guns were aimed at the district of Saint-Antoine. Its residents feared the governor might use his firepower to level their neighborhood.
When we reached the Bastille, an excited crowd had already gathered. They were demanding that the gunpowder be handed over to the citizens' militia. But first, we had to put an end to the danger from the guns.
The delegates were allowed in to see Governor Delaunay. Under his command, he had 82 soldiers, reinforced by 32 Swiss mercenaries. That put him in a position of strength. He even provided non-commissioned officers as hostages as a guarantee of the delegates' safety.
Depuis le début du mois de juillet, le gouverneur de Launay a fait installer sur les tours de la Bastille des canons qui sont chargés et qui n'attendent que l'ordre de la mise à feu pour pouvoir être actionnés. C'est un facteur aggravant d'angoisse et d'inquiétude pour la population parisienne et plus particulièrement celle du faubourg Saint-Antoine contre lequel sont pointés les canons.
Im Namen der Nation bitten wir Sie, Herr Gouverneur, die Kanonen zu demontieren. Ganz Paris ist in Unruhe und Aufruhr. Das Volk fühlt sich bedroht. Ich flehe Sie an, Herr Gouverneur. Bedenken Sie, ob Sie wirklich Krieg gegen die Nation führen wollen.
Was denken Sie von mir, meine Herren? Natürlich will ich das nicht. Aber bitte, setzen Sie sich doch. Aber ohne den Befehl des Königs kann ich die Kanonen nicht entfernen lassen. Ich lasse sie umdrehen.
Wirklich? Dann bitte ich Sie um Ihr Ehrenwort als Marquis.
Na schön. Wenn es das Volk beruhigt, ich gebe Ihnen mein Ehrenwort als Marquis de Launay. Allerdings nur unter einer Bedingung. Dass die Bürger unsere Brücken und Tore nicht angreifen. Solange Sie Frieden halten, werden wir von unseren Waffen keinen Gebrauch machen. Meine Herren.
Danke, Mann.
Delaunay's mainstay was the Swiss Guards. They had been in the Bastille for just a week, since the 7th of July. Their commander was a Swiss officer, Ludwig von Fleur.
Gibt tatsächlich dem Pöbel nach.
Angry crowds went on gathering outside the Hôtel de Ville and the Bastille. But so far, no one was thinking about storming the prison.
When the delegates came back to the Hôtel de Ville to report to the permanent committee, a crowd was already waiting for them. Everyone was eager to hear whether the negotiations had succeeded. For us, so much depended on whether the prison governor would yield. Inside Paris, we were under the muzzles of the Bastille's cannons. And outside Paris, the king's troops stood ready to attack.
Ich bitte um Ruhe, Bürger. Wir haben das Ehrenwort des Gouverneurs. Der Gouverneur will...
Woher kam das? Das waren die Kanonen des
Where did the thunderclap come from? Was it the king's cannons? Then we realized it was the Bastille.
Das ist parat! Auf zur Bastille!
Or, certains prétendent dire, le matin du 14 juillet, avoir entendu une forte explosion. Cela a contribué fortement à aggraver le sentiment de peur. En effet, depuis le 13 juillet, les Parisiens vivent dans l'angoisse. Ils se sont réveillés donc au son du canon d'alarme, du tambour roulant et du tocsin. La peur est désormais un élément quotidien qui ne lâche plus les Parisiens. Cette peur a deux visages, un visage destructeur et néfaste lorsqu'il s'agit de supprimer son adversaire coûte que coûte. Elle peut aussi avoir un visage tout à fait positif lorsqu'elle devient le moteur même du courage.
Marchons à la Bastille, to the Bastille. That explosion, to this day no one knows where it came from, began the storming of the Bastille. From all over the city, people came running to find out what had happened. The oncoming crowd was blocked by a gate at the end of the laneway. A tradesman climbed over and opened it from the inside. Then a moat in front of the drawbridge finally stopped the advance. The siege began.
Thousands of angry citizens, armed with pikes, knives, axes and guns, spontaneously besieged the fortress. It was complete chaos. No one heeded the soldiers' warnings to stop or be fired on. Everyone rushed to the gate.
Governor Delaunay was in a dilemma. He didn't want a war with the people of Paris, but now they were storming the gate. He believed his promise not to attack them no longer applied. He could not accept any demand from the people to hand over his fortress. Delaunay had no military experience. The Swiss Guards had no faith in his abilities as a commander. He changed his mind too often, yet everything was in his hands.
Ihre Befehle?
Delaunay, completely out of his depth, gave a fateful order.
Schießen Sie.
What happened then changed everything. The Swiss Guards opened fire on us, showing no mercy. We were defenseless against their shots from the safety of the fortress walls.
Delaunay had declared war on the people after all. Over 80 died on the spot, with even more dying later of their wounds. When the shooting stopped, the provisional city government sent a delegation to the gate with a flag of truce. The permanent committee now claimed supreme military command in Paris. And it wanted the Bastille to submit to it.
Monsieur Delaunay, im Namen des Stadtparlaments. Die Stadtregierung hat die Befehlsgewalt über alle Streitkräfte übernommen. Öffnen Sie das Tor für die Bürgerwehr. Fügen Sie sich dem Willen der Bürgerschaft.
Niemals! Verschwindet! Ich unterstehe dem Befehl des Königs und sonst niemandem!
To this day, no one knows whether Delaunay gave the order to fire again or whether it was just a misunderstanding. It is a fact that the white flag was ignored and the firing began once again.
Die Bastille muss in unserer Hand, aber Delaunay widersetzt sich dem Volk. Ohne Verstärkung haben wir keine Chance. Also lasst uns zum Rathaus gehen.
Zum Rathaus! Los!
En tout, une force de 30 000 hommes entoure Paris et ne font qu'accroître l'angoisse des Parisiens. En revanche, il existe dans Paris une force de 3 500 hommes qui sont les fameuses gardes françaises et qui, depuis la fin du mois de juin, ont décidé de lever la crosse et se refusent dès lors de réprimer les manifestations des Parisiens. Au contraire même, ils manifestent avec les Parisiens. Désormais, il existe à l'intérieur même de l'armée des régiments sur lesquels on ne peut plus compter.
A former officer, Hulin, had abandoned his loyalty to the king. He urged the French Guard to side with the people.
Meine Brüder, seid ihr Bürger? Ihr seid mutige französische Bürger. Habt ihr die Kanonen gehört? Sie bringen die Bürger von Paris und eure Kameraden um. Das sind eure Brüder, die dort sterben. Sie schlachten unsere Väter, unsere Frauen, unsere Kinder ab wie die Schafe.
Recht. Ja, natürlich.
Ihr lasst euch niedermetzeln, obwohl ihr stark genug wäret, die Verräter zu bestrafen.
The French Guard allowed Hulin to sway them. Cheered on by the crowds, they marched to the Bastille gate.
Dans le milieu de l'après-midi, l'affaire bascule complètement. Une colonne de garde française s'approche de la Bastille avec à sa tête deux militaires, Élie et Hulin. C'est eux qui disposent donc les batteries de façon efficace et qui rendent le tir encore plus meurtrier. Il est évident que sans l'apport de ces forces armées, la prise de la Bastille n'aurait pu être réalisée et c'est cette alliance entre le peuple de Paris et l'armée parisienne qui fait de ce siège une véritable victoire pour le peuple parisien.
Now we too had cannons. Hulin and his guardsmen had saved us when we were about to give up. Now there was only one cry: storm the Bastille! But thick smoke made it impossible to place the cannons in position. A cartload of burning straw had been left outside the gate to block our soldiers' view. But Second Lieutenant Élie showed his courage. Without hesitating, he ran to pull the cart out of the way. He was right in the line of fire. He had made it. That day, everyone was their own commander and did what they liked. Even citizens who had never held a gun became heroes.
About 1,000 leaderless tradesmen and workers had begun a doomed siege. But the arrival of Hulin changed all that. Delaunay could see this too. When he saw the cannons, he was at his wit's end. After all, he was a prison governor, not a military officer. He was completely unprepared to defend the Bastille against an artillery attack by the people of Paris. Fleur, too, saw that the French Guard were taking the lead. Now they were dealing with well-trained and battle-tried soldiers. Fleur knew the governor would not be able to deal with this situation. Delaunay could see only one solution. We have 20 hundredweight of gunpowder. If you do not accept our surrender, we will blow up the fortress and the whole district.
Wollen Sie etwa kapitulieren? Die Bastille aufgeben? Wir haben doch alles unter Kontrolle. Wir müssen die Bastille auf jeden Fall halten. Das sind wir dem König schuldig. Wir haben Waffen, Pulver und Kanonen. Wenn Sie kapitulieren, wird der König Sie aufs Schafott bringen. Es ist Ihre Pflicht zu kämpfen, Ihre Pflicht als Gouverneur.
Ich habe keine Wahl. Ich kann doch keinen Krieg gegen die Stadt führen. Es ist ausweglos. Jetzt haben sie auch noch Kanonen. Sie werden die Tore einschießen und uns alle umbringen. Ich kann doch keinen Krieg gegen die Bürger von Paris führen. Es sind französische Bürger. Sie haben den Tod nicht verdient. Ich habe keine Wahl. Überbringen Sie die Kapitulation.
Macht die Tore auf! Im Namen der Stadtregierung!
Fleur had no sympathy for the governor's scruples and fears. But he had to obey, even if he doubted his commander's competence. For Fleur, defending the Bastille was a matter of honor and loyalty to the king. Nevertheless, he had the surrender passed out through the gate.
Seid mal ruhig! Wartet doch mal! Ich glaube, Sie wollen uns etwas mitteilen!
Gebt mal ein Brett nach vorne!
Gut, legt es hin. Wer geht freiwillig? Ich gehe. Gut.
One of us ventured onto the narrow plank.
Halt!
Fleur could have disobeyed the order. He could have felt a higher loyalty to the king than to the inept governor. In this situation, he could have taken over command.
Das ist Verrat an unserem König. Sie nehmen die Kapitulation nicht an.
Delaunay was about to carry out his threat to blow up the Bastille and the neighboring district, knowing that thousands of people would die. If he had blown up the Bastille, would it have sparked the forceful suppression of the uprising and the arrest of the National Assembly? Would history have taken a different course? What would have happened if? There are different ways of answering that question.
Le nez de Cléopâtre, s'il avait été plus long, la face du monde en eût été changée. Et si la Bastille n'avait pas été prise? On a le droit de faire des spéculations et de monter des scénarios. Le premier serait que, finalement, la vieille forteresse ait résisté, que les gardes françaises se soient tournées contre le peuple. À ce moment-là, peut-être, les choses auraient changé, car ça aurait été un succès, un triomphe, pour la réaction royale telle qu'elle était en train de concentrer ses forces.
Depuis 200 ans, une historiographie que l'on peut qualifier de libérale s'est demandé quel aurait été le scénario d'une révolution sans révolution. Une révolution sans l'intrusion du peuple, finalement, comme un acteur fondamental. Il existait un modèle pour ces hommes-là, c'était la fameuse glorieuse révolution de l'Angleterre. Cette révolution avait vu les élites anglaises, finalement, accaparer le processus de la révolution et construire ce modèle de la monarchie parlementaire, donc d'une monarchie qui conférait aux élites tout le pouvoir et toute leur puissance. Les hommes de 1789, à leur tour, auraient pu rêver de ce modèle-là.
la Bastille, c'est une émeute parmi d'autres. C'est une émeute qui, en fait, n'est pas d'une importance dramatique considérable, mais qui trouve véritablement son sens dans une lecture politique, puisqu'elle légitime en définitive le pouvoir que les députés viennent de s'arroger. Donc, que ça soit passé le 14 juillet ou que ça soit passé quelques jours plus tard, de toute façon, la violence populaire était là en liaison avec la révolution politique et certainement impossible à éviter tant il y avait aussi d'opposition dans la cour et chez les aristocrates.
It could have happened that way, but it did not.
A message was passed out. Did the soldiers want to join us? Did they want to warn us? Without telling the crowd what was in the letter, Elie impulsively agreed to it.
Was denn? Was steht denn auf dem Zettel?
Beim Ehrenwort eines Offiziers der Bürgergarde. Wir nehmen die Kapitulation an. Lasst die Brücke runter. Es wird euch nichts passieren. Sie kapitulieren. Sie kapitulieren.
Soldaten, lasst die Brücke runter!
Without waiting for Delaunay's order, the garrison soldiers let down the drawbridge. There was no stopping us now. There were cries of vengeance. Too many people had died. Not everyone heard Elie guarantee a safe withdrawal. All the people's fury was unleashed on the soldiers. None of them offered any resistance. They laid down their guns without fighting. The Swiss guards escaped the people's wrath. They had turned their uniforms inside out, and we thought they were prisoners.
Delaunay was relying on Elie's word of honor. He was counting on safe conduct. But instead, the mob demanded that he should release the prisoners. Assuming the prisoners were in the dungeons, they set out to find them. Instead, they found bright tower rooms and a well-equipped prison library. They did not find the notorious dungeons portrayed in so many horrifying pictures. Nor did they find any chained-up prisoners of the king. Enraged, the mob looted the governor's rooms and threw the prison's files out of the window.
Nach der Eroberung der Bastille versuchten die Sieger, sich von der Bastille zu befreien. Sie taten das, indem sie die Akten der Bastille aus dem Archiv in die Gräben geworfen haben. Und das ist der Grund dafür, dass diese Akten heute etwas ramponiert aussehen und für den Historiker schwerer zu benutzen sind. Im 18. Jahrhundert war die Bastille eigentlich ein sehr angenehmes Gefängnis geworden. Einer der Gefangenen berichtet, dass das Zimmer gut war, die Verpflegung gut war und er genug Papier und Tinte hatte, um schreiben zu können. Und dies ist ein Beweis dafür, dass die Bastille eigentlich unnötig geworden war. Man wollte sie sogar abreißen, man brauchte sie eigentlich gar nicht mehr. Und die 7 Gefangenen, die man am Abend des 14. Juli doch noch befreien konnte, waren keine vorzeigbaren Gefangenen. Es waren Wechselfälscher, Betrüger, Geisteskranke und ein Sexualverbrecher. Und dies ist der Hinweis darauf noch einmal, dass die Bastille in der Tat unnötig geworden war.
The notorious royal prison turned out to be a luxury jail for common criminals. So the liberators invented a political prisoner, the Comte de Lorge, and a miserable history for him, for which the king could be blamed.
An angry mob drove the governor through the Paris streets. They wanted to lynch him. In a rage, he had ordered his soldiers to fire on the crowd in front of the Bastille. He had 98 of us on his conscience. He was later called Delaunay the Monster. He deserved to be punished, but what happened went too far. It violated our word of honor. Oh God, a butcher cut his head off. What kind of victory trophy was that?
The people got their revenge. Delaunay's head was borne in triumph to the Hôtel de Ville.
Ce qui est radicalement nouveau, c'est le rituel macabre et politique qui consiste à poser une tête sur une pique. Quelque chose de radicalement neuf apparaît à ce moment-là et qui constitue une rupture dans le processus politique. Désormais, la révolution, qui n'était qu'espoir de régénération, doit faire avec cette violence qu'elle ne peut plus canaliser et qui devient un des traits constitutifs de cette révolution.
Revolutionary tribunals were set up. Political prisoners were incarcerated in the Conciergerie, a jail on the River Seine. Nobles and bishops, former ministers, generals, academics, anyone whose background or political attitude was suspect was locked up here. Queen Marie Antoinette spent her last days here before her execution. Before the blade of the guillotine fell, all the hair was cropped clear of the neck. "Let us be terrible so that the people will not have to be," proclaimed Danton. Now, no one was safe. Louis XVI was condemned for conspiracy against the nation. His head fell on the 21st of January, 1793. Thousands of heads followed. Many of the victims' skulls now lie in the catacombs of Paris. From September 1793 to August 1794, more than 16,000 people were executed. It was called the Terror. The revolution was devouring its own children. Did the violence discredit the revolution? Today, historians say that the terror cannot be justified. But they also say that without violence, the Ancien Régime could not have been overcome and freedom would not have been won.
La Bastille est prise et les portes sont ouvertes. The Bastille is taken and the gates are open. The people were jubilant. In 24 hours, the people of Paris had fought for their freedom and won. Not out of noble-mindedness, but out of fear.
That evening, an astute builder gathered his workers and began demolishing the Bastille. The first sacrifice that patriotism makes to freedom must be the razing of the Bastille. The terrible colossus of despotism fell, and with it, the chains of a whole oppressed nation. No Danton, Robespierre or Mirabeau was present at the storming of the Bastille. It was a collective event. The people themselves, the nation, made it fall. The storming of the Bastille went down in history as a break between the old regime and the new age of freedom. The storming of the Bastille was one of the most important events of the French Revolution. Today, the outlines of the fortress on the cobbled street are a reminder of the historical events that took place here, as is its name, the Place de la Bastille. The stones were made into patriotic relics, and every department was given a miniature Bastille, inscribed with the words liberty, equality, fraternity.
Ces diplômes de vainqueur de la Bastille, ces médailles qu'on décerne aux hommes qui ont participé à sa prise, les pierres sculptées un peu plus tard, figurant la Bastille, soulignent l'extraordinaire force symbolique de l'événement. Il a été ressenti comme tel dès le début, mais ce que je voudrais dire, c'est que cette force symbolique va grandir encore au fil des mois et des années qui vont suivre. Et ce n'est pas par hasard si c'est l'année d'après qu'on va décerner ce diplôme de vainqueur de la Bastille. Et tout au long de la période révolutionnaire, le thème de la Bastille va constituer, et la représentation, je veux dire, aussi bien sculptée qu'en gravure, va être un symbole de la liberté.
Louis XVI had been informed of what was happening in Paris on the 14th of July. But in his hunting diary, he wrote angrily, "Rien, shot nothing." Versailles was asleep. Only the king's chamberlain, Duke La Rochefoucauld-Liancourt, wondered whether he should wake his master. He had to, for the 14th of July had changed everything.
Sire, die Situation ist ernster, als wir dachten. Die Nationalgarde hat sich mit dem Volk verbündet. Die Bastille ist gefallen.
Das ist ja eine Revolte!
Nein, Sire. Das ist eine Revolution.
At the tennis court in Versailles, the deputies of the National Assembly met well into the night of the 14th of July. They had heard of the events in Paris. Then La Rochefoucauld-Liancourt brought the news that the king would appear before the National Assembly the following day. The deputies were hopeful. The royal troops were also refusing to use force against the deputies, who knew that the king must surrender and accept his fate. They could now calmly await the next day when Louis XVI would recognize the National Assembly as the nation's representative body. On the 17th of July, the king traveled to Paris. Wouldn't it be better to head the new movement than to oppose it? He received a jubilant welcome. In a symbolic act, he recognized the citizens' militia and the permanent committee as the new city government. The new mayor, Jean-Sylvain Bailly, presented the king with the blue and red cockade of the people. Louis attached it to the white cockade of the monarchy. This was the birth of the French flag, the tricolore.
Bailly, dans ses mémoires, relate qu'il a une certaine appréhension, il a peur de la réaction du roi. En fait, tout se passe très bien. Le roi arrive, il est acclamé au cours de son voyage et à l'arrivée à l'hôtel de ville. Il met la cocarde sur son chapeau et on sent dans ses mémoires de Bailly une grande émotion populaire, des larmes, dit-il. La foule l'acclame en disant « Vive notre roi, vive notre père ».
These national treasures are preserved in the French National Archives. Codes and heavy doors protect objects that few people realize are part of the heritage of the French Revolution. Such as the original meter, for the Revolution introduced the metric system. The original Declaration of the Rights of Man is also here, and, of course, the keys to the Bastille. It all began when they were captured on the 14th of July, 1789. Relics of a day that made world history. The Declaration of the Rights of Man began. Men are born and remain free and equal. The French were no longer subjects, but citizens who determined their own destiny. It was the birth of democracy in France. In September 1791, France became a constitutional monarchy. Now the people ruled. In September 1792, the monarchy was abolished and France became a republic. 1804 brought a new legal code, the Code Civil. The 14th of July did not become the French National Day until 100 years after the storming of the Bastille. For a long time, the nation's views of the revolution were divided. For some, it was the locomotive of history. For others, a lot of noise for little return. Today, nation and revolution are reconciled. Delaunay was the first victim of the revolution, even though he didn't want war against the people. "I will not leave my clergy and nobles in the lurch," said Louis XVI. It cost him his head. Hulin, who led the people to the crucial victory, became a popular hero.
And me? If I had not been there myself, I would never believe it. The 14th of July, 1789, was the greatest revolution in history. I was the only woman to be honored as a victor of the Bastille.
We cannot treat all the cases.